Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to RimWorld Ye Olde Knights, episode 11. Brace yourselves ladies and gentlemen, because today's episode is a tale of bravery and bloodshed. But we'll get to the bravery and bloodshed at a later time in the video. Right now we're just having a good old time, laying around on the floor, playing some pool, writing some letters, eating some stew, you know how we be doing. First things first today, we need plenty of room for all our new recruits in the Black Knights Guild, so we started digging out some new bedrooms and whatnot. And just as well, we were also cutting down plenty of trees because it takes a lot of wood to fuel all the lanterns and whatnot that we have going throughout the keep. We also began working on some caltrops around our walls for defensive purposes. That way, if anyone gets too close, they'll get a little cut on their little footsie and then they'll get an infection and then they'll die. But it wasn't all doom and gloom and defenses and cuts on people's feet. We were also working on a nice set of plasteel armor for our leader of the Black Knights Guild. Who could it be? My bet is going to be on Shark. Yeah, it's going to be Shark. We already talked about it. It's definitely Shark. But the beautiful armor would have to wait. We have a raid from the Empire faction of this planet. They're dropping right in on top of us. They crashed through the ceiling of our great hall and jumped forth from their pods and began shooting at us, and we were forced to engage in close quarters combat with these sick freaks. Luckily though, our warhammers penetrated their pitiful flak armor quite easily. Oh you fools, that's not real armor. This is armor. There's nowhere you fools can hide. We will break your breastplates with our hammers and then we will scoop out your innards, or something like that. Our Lynx Harry even got in on the action and managed to kill one of those filthy Imperials. There was another as well by the eastern gate trying to make a run for it. Our rats almost accidentally let him out, but he was still trapped. And here came Shark to cave in his head with his hammer. And once again, Shark has proven himself as a true war hero. A little bit after the raid, we all gathered in ye old hospital beds to tend to ourselves so nobody would bleed to death from the wounds. And then shortly after the battle and whatnot as well, and all the tending, we had some pirates nearby with a smoke spewer, but I really didn't pay too much attention to that, as we had much bigger matters to attend to. That's right, it's finally time for Shark's knighting ceremony. Well, I guess he's kind of already a knight, but we're going to give him a title and hold a ceremony, and a shiny new set of armor. For his title, I believe I'm going to call him the Paladin of Retribution. I like the ring of it. King George whipped out his sword and tapped Shark on each shoulder one time, and then it was done. He was now our Paladin of Retribution. The only thing now was for him to put on his new shiny plasteel armor. Shortly after the ceremony had concluded, though, the other Black Knights whipped out their war hammers and pointed them towards the sky to show their respect for their new official leader. Then they all gathered around Shark to embrace him and show their respects and their loyalty to him. Truly a glorious moment for Rat's Mountain, the House of Rat, and for the Crown. Some time later I decided to start mining into the mountain a bit more, that way we could expand the keep. I decided that it would be best to start with a much larger workshop so we have more room to store our items and whatnot as well. I also noticed that Lagua was missing a few fingers, so I decided to go ahead and start working on some artificial wooden medieval prosthetic fingers that he could have installed, and that way his mining and whatnot would be a bit better, his manipulation. And then he continued mining out our workshop and our new storage room for us. But you're not here for the mining, you're here for the raids. We have a massive group of ferals who have decided to come and sack our keep, or at least so they think. And they brought some creatures, it would appear, with them. Some ogres and some kind of slimy snail thing. Realistically, I guess this raid isn't all that massive, but the giant cannons that the giant ogres are, so that's kind of where I got the massive from. Since I know everybody loves kill boxes in RimWorld, I decided to use ours and let all the ogres walk on our caltrops and hurt their little feetsies and toesies up until the point that they made it out and we started pelting them with bullets until they eventually died. After we had demolished their forces, the surviving members of the feral raid decided that it was probably time to turn tail and try to leave. Which was probably in their best interest, everyone except for one ogre who tried to bust through our doors. I suppose he hadn't given up hope yet. But a few bullets later, and his putrid little ogre soul decided to leave his body. And he died. However, though, we did manage to capture one of those filthy inbred ferals, and I didn't think he was much for nobility, but you know what, we'll give him a shot in the Black Knights Guild. So we captured him and started tending to his wounds so he didn't die. And then after that whole kerfuffle was all said and done, we decided to go back to working on our beautiful workshop. We started making some amazing tiles. We started bringing in all of our workshop equipment, like our crafting bench and, all that junk. By the time we were done with the workshop, the feral that we had taken in and attempted to recruit had been recruited, so we sent them to the warehouse where they could finally don the black armor. And might I just say that they look rather dashing in it. It was very suitable. I think that they would make a wonderful addition, even if they were inbred. Nothing wrong with that. Except for maybe having a third eye. Anyhow, though, Shark decided to lead an expedition of the Black Knights Guild to a local ancient structure to see what goodies it withheld within. It didn't take them very long, and they were off on their adventure with our horsies, and they were riding all the way to the ancient structure as mentioned. We got a good look at the structure, and then we began galloping towards it, ready to murder anyone that stood in our way or that was inside. After our Black Knights Guild actually made their way to the structure, I decided the best way to handle this would probably be to go to each side and bust open a hole in the wall. That way, if the unstable fuel nodes exploded, the fire would not cause superheated air on the inside and nobody would burn to death. We found a centipede, and then Shark accidentally awoken one of the ancient soldiers that were taking a little snooze in a cryo-sleep casket, so we quickly beat his head in with our hammers. After quickly beating the soldier into submission and/or death, we turned our attention towards the centipede. We decided to start firing a few shots at it to try and get its attention where it would come outside, and we could kind of gather around it and just beat the shit out of it. Then we collected all our goodies and decided to leave. But there was a local mining work site that we actually decided to go and try and raid. I kind of decided to send them on a bit of a crusade, I'll be honest with you. We ended up raiding quite a few places. After approaching the mining work site, we began galloping towards all its inhabitants with our large, muscular, manly warhammers, and we just started kind of splitting skulls until most of them were dead, and anyone that wasn't, we kind of tracked them down and started just bashing them. Except for this lucky soul who got away from us just in the nick of time. We would have killed him real good. But off we went again to another mining work site to terrorize the inhabitants who were there mining. We galloped through the rain and through the mud. As the lightning struck the ground, we were crushing people's ribs and other ligaments and bones and things like that. I'll be honest, it is really fun just being a massive powerhouse kingdom. Even with the Black Knights Guild being as small as it is on their own on horseback, they're extremely powerful. I think we could literally handle a large raid on a settlement. But that will all be in due time, my friends. On our way back to Rat's Mountain, we had a small mech cluster fall not too far outside our keep. We would have to deal with that as well within due time. Then, of course, not too long after that, the Black Knights Guild had finally made it home with the spoils of war, and they even managed to take one prisoner. Now, that's not a lot of prisoners, seeing how many people we killed, but it's better than nothing. The king himself even made his way down to take her to her prison cell and began recruiting her. And now this is kind of coming out of left field, but I decided to start on a honestly very large project. I actually decided to mine out a massive section of the mountain to add on to the keep a arena. I thought an arena would be a really nice touch, where we could have tournaments and that sort of thing between our knights, slaves, and people of that sort, of course. It took a very long time, though, to be honest with you, to get all this carved out. I mean, we were working tirelessly on it, but it still took a little while. And while we were working on it, we even managed to recruit the prisoner that we had just recently taken from one of the mining work sites. And now she would be able to don the black armor of the Black Knights Guild. But back to the arena. We got to building some nice tile, and then after a while, we installed some beautiful lights and began smoothing the walls. And a little while after that, I decided it was finally time for some entertainment. We were going to have our very first tournament in the arena. This tournament would be between our two slaves, Gorbaka and Kale. And the winner of this tournament would actually be allowed to join the Black Knights Guild. They've been with us for a very long time, so I thought maybe they deserved it. The two slaves entered the dimly lit arena with all the nobility, the king, the queen, the Black Knights Guild, all eyes just glaring at them. But they both knew that the winner of this tournament would receive a prize better than anything they could hope for as slaves. So they both brandished their weapons and prepared. And then, just like that, they began attacking one another. Kale quickly gained the upper hand on Gorbaka, and just like that, like a flash of lightning, it was over. Kale was victorious. Just as we always say, not just anyone can be a Black Knight, you must be tough enough, and Kale has truly proven herself today to be tough enough for that position. So, just after the battle had concluded, we have one of our Black Knights escort Kale to her prison cell where we would begin her recruitment training for the Black Knights Guild. It would be a long and drawn-out process of mentally preparing Kale to become a Black Knight, but it would be well worth it, and she has earned it truly. And in the meantime, in other good news, the king decided to go ahead and do an operation on Lagua to kind of attach some wooden fingers to his old chewed-up fingers that he had lost in battle. They're still there, kind of, they've just kind of been cut down to nubs, so this should be a lot better than that, nothing too fancy. And now that time had passed for a little while and we had a few more Black Knights to the guild, except for Kale, we decided to go out on another raiding party to a local hunting worksite. We got a good eyeball of the old hunting worksite, and it was nothing too fancy, nothing we hadn't seen 100 times before, neither were its inhabitants. So the Black Knights gathered with their rifles and their hammers and began their raid. We galloped towards them all as fast as we could, well, as fast as the horse would let us with our massive steel armor and some of our knights a little overweight. Nothing wrong with that, though. But we engaged them on the battlefield and began smashing some heads and, firing a few bullets into people. We had one lone bowman who decided to try and make his last stand out there in the rain, so we quickly bashed his head in like a little watermelon, and there he lay on the ground dead. And upon further inspection of this hunting site, we found something very useful to us: food and animal corpses to turn into food. Shortly after the Black Knights Guild returned home, though, we had a little bit of trouble out of a scyther from the mech cluster that had dropped previously, up until the point that we blasted it into oblivion. Now this pissed off the other Mechanoids, though, and they decided to try and attack us head on, but just began walking through our murder hallway, unfortunately for them. But unfortunately, they did spot our Black Knights Guild as we were coming back to try and get into the base to try and defend our home. And unfortunately, Newton took a charge blast right to the spine and was severely injured. But our brave and strong Black Knights Guilds, wielding their war hammers, decided to charge at the mechanical menaces and start beating the absolute shit out of them. We finally defeated the Mechanoids, but at what cost? Newton's injury left her spine shattered. She would never be able to walk again. From this day forward, Newton will now be known as Newton the Broken, and she will have to stay in bed, and we will have to feed her like a baby bird by chewing up her food and spitting it into her mouth, until hopefully someday we could get her a bionic spine. But unfortunately, until then, Newton is going to have to be bedridden. It'll probably take a very long time. Now, in other news though, the Queen's crown had been destroyed in combat at some point, so we decided to make her another one out of silver, and it was a masterwork. And for what would come next, the Queen would need as much protection as she could get. We had a bunch of Outlanders landing nearby in transport pods with the intention to try and sack our keep. And it would appear that they intended to do so by way of mortar shells. That's right, they were going to siege us, and then after they were able to breach our walls with their mortars, they were going to waltz right on in and start tickling our little fannies. But you all know how I feel about fanny ticklings. It ain't gonna happen, Captain. So the King and Queen devised a plan that we would try to attack these seizures preemptively. So we packed up our catapults and whatnot and went down to the area. It took a little while, but we finally arrived down to where they had set up their siege, and we began slinging some big old rocks directly at their heads. Thankfully, George was fairly accurate with the catapult, and we ended up hitting one of them with our large rock and killing them. Unfortunately for them, this really pissed them off, and they decided to try and chase us all the way back to Rat's Mountain. Shortly after arriving at Rats Mountain, though, we hid behind the safety of our walls, and the fools were forced to come through a murder hall. We have outsmarted them, it would seem. While the others were being murdered in the murder hall, we went out to try and pick up Galro, who was down just outside the walls. Thankfully, one of our black knights were quick on their horse and rescued her. As the others died and fled, the self-proclaimed leader of the Outlanders, wearing some type of God King armor, we'll peel that right off of them after we murder them. Anyhow, they decided to try and bust their way through our hallway, only to be met by the King and Queen wielding their mace and sword. There is no besting King George and Queen Busto, I tell you. Alrighty though, guys, I'm going to go ahead and call this an episode. Thank you all ever so much for watching. I truly do appreciate you. And thank you guys for your patience. I know that there's been a lack of videos lately, or at least in this series, and I, just find it a little hard to find time to kind of make time to record. Or at least voice lines, right? That's the hardest part for me, is getting the recording, cutting up all the recording, and then doing the voice line. Even for something like this, just barely like 15 to 16 minutes. Still kind of hard sometimes, so I do apologize. But I hope you guys have enjoyed. I thank you all so very much for your watching and your support and love and all of that wonderful stuff, as per the usual, that you guys are awesome. If you're new here, though, of course, be sure to like, subscribe. Be sure to like anyways, right? Even if you're not new here. But, yeah, like, subscribe, all that junk that everyone else says on this platform. And once again, thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.